Hello, Mudasir.
Hi, Sai. Good morning.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I am likewise. It's great to be together again for another episode, if you will, of Deconstructed. Um,
Yeah.
Please go on.
No. Yeah. These sessions are quite enriching for me as well as hope the audience feels the same.
Most definitely. Sentiments completely mutual, my friend, all around. Just ever so quickly, as background to those that may be joining us new or returning, as Mudasir and I have mentioned before, as we reflect on the past few, if you will, very turbulent years, society-wise, one of the key things that emerged for us is really exploring the world, different topics, take concepts, deconstruct them, get to their essence, and explore what they're all about, and then reconstruct them in a very practical way to offer guidance for surviving and thriving. And as you and I have always mentioned, deeply rooted in practice, if you will. So very much not merely theoretical conversation.
hmm
Uh,
hmm
Anything to add, my good friend, or you can introduce yourself?
Yeah. Let's get started with the introductions and then get started. Uh, Hi, hello everyone there. I'm Mudassir again, and I am working as an agile practitioner. I'll coach and mentor teams and organizations. I collaborate across the levels and then bring in with my multiple perspectives and working with the teams in different geographies to deliver business outcomes. That's that about my introduction. Over to you, Sai.
Excellent, my friend. Excellent. And I'm Sai, as mentioned, and I'm a transformation and change agent, if you will. I partner with organizations to help them calibrate their business models and operating models to achieve maximum impact in the world. A lot of what I share is always deeply rooted in practice and backed by theory, but specifically focuses on how we engage reality, human nature, identity, and integrate those facets through awareness for that impact. So you can definitely look us up on LinkedIn and learn more about us by all means. So with that said, my good friend, our topic today, of course, is problem solving in a scientific method. And I would love for you to kind of kick us off with your perspective, Mudasir.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, to start with problem solving and the scientific method, let's touch base on why do we need scientific method to solve a problem. So, my take on that is in current times where everyone has their own opinion, and it is likely probable to lead a confirmation bias as well as some sort of mental rigidity to explore other side of the coin, or what are the facts that is out there. So hence problem solving and the scientific method is more than a necessity in current times. So that's my take on why do we need problem solving and the scientific method, and what are your thoughts on that side?
I completely agree. I think the both the problem solving and the scientific method are so rooted in us and how we interact with the world. It's quintessential, especially in times like these. And as we move forward, it's even that much more crucial.
Mm-hmm.
The word that you use that piques my interest even more deeply is opinion. Everyone has an
Mm-hmm.
opinion, if you will,
Correct.
and the rigidity that becomes if we're not aware that what we have is an opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So very well said. So if I
Yeah.
push, yeah, go on, please,
Yeah,
Mauricio.
and to solve any problem in any technique of solving a problem, not just a scientific method, a highly opinionated approach will not help. And as you rightly said, opinion plus rigidity becomes unidimensional, and people will not see what else is there out.
Well said. And I would even go as far as to say that it becomes a vicious cycle. The more you have an opinion, it builds rigidity if you don't challenge your opinion. And then fundamentally, that builds rigidity in not challenging. And then it becomes a vicious cycle because you begin to actually believe your opinions
Right.
versus actually test them against reality in terms of problem solving in a scientific method.
Exactly. Exactly.
So kind of pushing a little bit further. could we distinguish between problem solving and the scientific method, or is there so much overlap from your perspective? And then I'll go ahead and share a little bit as well.
It's, in my opinion, it's kind of intertwined. I would say scientific method is more of a technique. Problem solving, you can approach to solve a problem in multiple ways, and scientific method is one of uh, the best approach or the best technique that, in my opinion, to deal with problems. So getting into the nuances of problem solving, so it's all about validating a hypothesis with whatever the questions or observations one has, with the background research what one has, and then based on that, once the hypothesis is arrived, experiment it out, and then analyze the results and conclude. And and this can be in a given context, or it can be applied broadly regardless of the context, so based on what we are dealing with.
Well described. If I add a little bit sort of color to how I look at it, because definitively
Mhm.
rooted in what you described, I look at problem solving, if you will, to be a little bit more strategic, kind of setting the context. And then the scientific method, if you will, to be operating within the context. If
Correct.
one is more strategic, the other is more tactical. One is, in a sense, top down. We can look at the big picture, come up with options. So as we use the word opinion, shift your opinion to the identification of options from a problem
Mhm.
solving perspective, and then experiment to test those options, see which options make sense, and then go ahead, if you will, and then feed that back into the problem solving process. So interrelated, and then the shift that I'm calling out, exactly as you started us off in opinion, is take your opinions and shift them into options. A very, very
Mhm.
distinctive shift there.
Right, and then we can say options as outcomes or solutions as well. So if one is highly opinionated, then that brings in the rigidity, as there will be only one solution or one right thing, right? So if if there is no rigidity, and the options can be considered as we have many solutions, and what fits to our context is what we can figure out. So opinions lead to rigidity, that will definitely kicked in into bias, confirmation bias. And options, what the good point, or the point to what you brought up about options, one can see only options when they can mellow down, or when they balance their opinions and try to experiment in a way to see what else are there. Exploring the options eventually turn out to be solutions or outcomes.
Well said. If as our folks that have joined us today and others who are listening to the recording, the shift from options to opinions helps us overcome the aspects of rigidity by building in flexibility, if you will, because options provide flexibility,
Right.
and opinions, essentially, if we believe them and if we begin to accept them without testing them, like we're saying, really begin to
Mhm.
manifest as that rigidity.
Right. Right.
Mudasir, there's as you kind of look at from your experience in working with people in different levels, et cetera, and I'll comment as well. What is it that precludes us, or what is it that really stands in our way as we form these opinions, if you will, and help? I want to say feed that rigidity, if you will. What is it that feeds that in a negative way?
It's a fixed mindset, or we are fixated on the areas, or the avenues where we can use the scientific method. So scientific method is, as I said, it is one of the technique that can be applied in your day in day out life, regardless wherever you are. So it can be applied by anyone in any context. So what precludes us is, many of us might apply this only at work, not not in their lives. And if you preferentially apply in some areas and not apply in other areas, you will not build that muscle. And I would like to call it as scientific temperament, where we develop a habit of experimenting the hypothesis. In other words, our opinions, if we are very rigid and fixated, and then we will not see the conclusions if we are fixated. And if we are open enough, then we can do experiments and see what conclusions we can get. So in a nutshell, what I'm calling is to build a habit of experimenting. That way, in any situation, or in reality, using the scientific method will become easy, and life become very easy as soon as you start using scientific method in most cases, or all the cases where one could see life is full of possibilities. We say that
Mhm.
saying, and life is full of possibilities. And one way of one way of realizing that is having that scientific temperament, where we can question our opinions, or we can test our hypothesis, whatever we have.
Excellent. I think there's a key to kind of summarize a little bit of what you said. I think there's a key connection that you've called out between a mindset, a temperament that then becomes a habit, and it
Mhm.
becomes a virtuous cycle. If we can go from a vicious cycle to a virtuous cycle in that uh, in that approach, so that I think that's very powerful. I, I would, if you will, add to what you're describing very
Mhm.
keenly, that if we keep in mind that the problem solving and the scientific method are interrelated, if you will, I think one of the key things that we have to be cognizant of, as you said, fixed mindset, is really ego, because at the core of this is when we look at our opinions or we look at the options, and we approach things. If we let ego get in the way, at that point, that's when it breaks down. And if
Mhm.
we try to
Mhm.
keep our ego in balance, very much it changes how we approach problem solving in the scientific method.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ego in any form, knowingly or unknowingly displaying an ego, and saying this is it, and this is the only solution that we have. Then that's where we need to realize the person is in the fixed mindset.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, I want to dive in a little bit deeper and add a little bit of flavor, if that seems reasonable. Kind of how
Yeah, yeah.
this.
Please go ahead and share how we can bring the scientific method in problem solving into use, and then make that habit, and then share your thoughts, Sai.
Definitely, definitely. So a lot of times, exactly as we're describing, problem solving in the scientific method is so intuitive to us, so natural, that we don't even think that we're applying problem solving in the scientific method, because we're just
Mm-hmm.
doing it.
Right.
So one distinction that I like to help people become aware of is really what we're doing is thinking with options. That's essentially problem solving. We're thinking with options. And when we're thinking with options, one key takeaway is you don't start with a problem and try to solve it. What you do is actually approach it from both sides and ask yourself, okay, what are the options relative to the problem? What are the options relative to the solution, potential solution? And then begin to explore the space in between.
Mm-hmm.
So, so if I say thinking with options, it's a very different feel. If I add another statement, if you will, not only thinking with options, but doing with experiments.
Right.
So kind of try and see what happens. That really is the scientific method. Very similarly, both of those become a process of exploration of the in between, if you will, and discovering what will work at the problem solving level, but then
Mm-hmm.
proving it out at the scientific method level, doing with experiments, prove it
Right.
out and see what happens, and then they feed each other. So that deconstruction of the more, what I've learned, if you will, the more aware in those terms of that deconstruction, the more powerful we can apply these tools and techniques, and
Mm-hmm.
likewise reduce the dependency and the biases that we have and the blind spots that we avoid as we move forward relative to our opinions. So,
Yes, yes. Well said, Sai. On that note, having a keenness to experiment, or the experimentation mindset itself, can be done if there are if there if a person is curious and want to test the hypothesis or validate the opinions. So curiosity is essential. And then if I can add the previous topics that we have covered, critical thinking, deliberate practice, and then also the theory of practice and practicing the theory, all this comes, or these are the fundamental blocks of problem solving, especially with a scientific method technique. And that's how I connect the dots. And then anything from your end to share on that front, or and also what else is there on how we can improve the scientific method, applying scientific method in our daily life.
Thank you so much, Mudasir. And likewise, I think that is key. Is that we really have from our previous conversations have almost established a foundation, if you will, to get us here. So
Mhm.
definitively, being creative is very crucial. Being curious is very crucial. Critical thinking in all aspects is
Right.
crucial, and what have you. The if we and I'm going to hone in on a word that both you and I have used before. If we look at these as muscles, the more we
Hmm.
exercise them, the
Hmm.
more, if you will, they become relevant and powerful and grow in strength. But
Certainly.
the less we exercise them, then they become problematic, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
we will
yeah,
lose that out, and then eventually fall back on our hypo, and then we may, and one may, and then anyone can lose that ability to experiment, and then heavily rely on hypothesis or the available solution, and go from, take it and then run from there.
exactly, exactly. So I think keeping in mind that these are true, these sort of techniques that we're talking about are truly muscles, then
Right.
it becomes very very much a different sensation as we experience them and leverage them. So notice you're kind of shifting even further. Any
Mhm.
specific sort of guidance that you suggest to folks as you work with them relative to some of these concepts in terms of problem solving in the scientific method?
Yeah, guidance in general is make a habit, and I would say, as we talked about muscle, and then make that as a habit of applying the scientific method, and that builds a ability to apply scientific method, even if you are not uh, consciously applying that. We need to reach to that level so that we can quickly get to a point. What is our awareness, what is the observation or information that I have on this subject, and what is the hypothesis I have, and based on that, we can experiment out something and see the results. And then not necessarily the hypothesis needs to be confirmed, and it is not binary, confirmed or not confirmed. Every hypothesis or every experiment driven by hypothesis will have a result, will have a conclusion. So we will get to know in a given context how is that playing out. And then in order to do that, as we both talked about, one need to be creative, one need to have critical thinking, and then more than anything, the openness as well as ability to think out of the box while doing experiments is very essential. And then if I talk in the agile teams and in the product development area with respect to agile teams, one good example I would call out is PDCA, plan, do, check, and act. And then this technique will help to build that muscle of scientific method. And many of us might not correlate PDCA as a scientific method, but essentially PDCA is a distilled or simplified version of scientific method. And we can do a lot of experiments, and not necessarily an experiment that we do in one agile team yielded a better results. At the same time, it is not given, or certainly we can say that this approach or this experiment will give the same result in different team or different context or different organizations. So that's the nuance that I would like to call. Scientific method is not a belief that if something is proven, that will be given for rest of the time, or rest irrespective of the context. Scientific method is close to reality, where something that is proven in the past or something that we concluded in the past, not necessarily the same conclusion might or will arrive in a different context.
Very well said. And I think that's a key distinction that you're emphasizing for the way that we're talking about the scientific method versus, I'll say, the natural sciences. Uh, in natural sciences, we're applying the scientific method to find a law of nature, perhaps, etc., and then be able to repeat the experiment, if you will, in that context. And in the case that we're talking about, it truly is much more exploratory based in the context. So you're not looking for a law to prove, like a hypothesis that becomes a law, but rather a hypothesis that advances at the broader scale, sort of problem solving, etc. If I can add to kind of what you're emphasizing, I think very practically, if you will, as you think about problem solving, approach it from both sides simultaneously. That's very key. So there's a natural simultaneous approach to solving a problem. Additionally, when we look at problem solving and the scientific method, they're occurring also simultaneously or in parallel. So we're not actually saying I'm switching to a scientific method thought process versus a problem solving thought process. It's continuous, both top down, bottom up, as I mentioned. The other very direct thing that I would emphasize to folks is this is iterative, if you will, as you're doing problem solving in scientific method. So it is iterative and incremental and advancing. And one key technique that I always emphasize is time boxing, if you will. And what that does is it helps build discipline, right? So we don't fester in the problem, nor do we get so sidetracked in the science, forgive me, in applying an experiment or what have you as well. That's another key aspect. Any thoughts?
And then
Yeah.
on the experimentation part, I think you called out experimentation simultaneously and have multiple experimentation going on. So on that note, I feel in a given experimentation, while we are trying to solve a problem, most of us, I also struggled with this. How can I try differently? How can I go with a different experimentation? Do I need to wait to complete this experimentation? So what I learned or what I experienced over a period of time is not necessarily we need to do experimentations in sequence. By changing a small parameter or small nuance, and then that may impact the outcome itself, will become a new experimentation. And this can be done in parallel, and it's essentially, I'm calling out it as a parallel thinking. What else can be done as part of this current experimentation that can be considered as uh, altogether unique experimentation other than what we are doing it. So having said that, that is my take on experimentation part itself, keeping the conclusions and outcomes aside. What is your take on how one should approach to validate the hypothesis or test the hypothesis by using scientific method?
Well said. I think that the key thing is exactly to your point. Doing an experiment, if you will, from a scientific method perspective, doing an experiment or the doing portion will reveal other options, if you will, based on those conclusions, based on what the experiment, if you will, reveals, that will feed back into the problem solving process. That cyclic aspect is very, very key. So definitively, if I can offer one major takeaway, if I summarize sort of a lot of thinking, one major takeaway that I think people, because of our biases, right, because of our blind spots, we really miss, is the following. The problem, a lot of people take the problem for granted and or take the fact that there is a solution as a fact. The reality is the problem needs to be explored. The problem you think you're solving may not actually be the problem.
Exactly.
I think that's if you take nothing away from our conversation, I think that's a big one. And speaking for a lot of folks that have interacted with me, I always say it this way. I say, if you have a problem, change the problem by how you look at the problem. Because
How you look at the problem. Sorry, not to interrupt. How you look at the problem. Is that a problem in first place? Even if it turned out to be a right problem, is that the problem that we need to resolve in such a way we will get more out whatever you call, whatever the benefit we are going to get out by resolving a problem or solving a problem. So that's a great call out, and how to see the reality that we have in hand and how to deal with the problems and then try to solve with scientific method. Thank you, Sai, for your input.
You're most welcome, my friend. And I think that really summarizes a lot of what we've experienced over the past number of years, is that what we thought was the problem perhaps wasn't the actual problem to be addressed, but there was a whole
Correct.
different problem, you know.
Yeah, and then and now this all these topics are connected very well, and then these are tying back, like, to assess a problem. Is this a problem, or are we resolving a right problem or the problem that we need to resolve? We need to critically think, and then in order to apply scientific method and try to resolve it, we need to bring in our deliberate practice and then practice of theory of scientific method in order to build that muscle or scientific temperament, how to deal with the problems that we face in reality.
Well said.
And it is all kind of a path, and all points are linking to each other.
Indeed, indeed, very much interconnected, very much interconnected. So with that, I mean, I hope definitely our conversations are valuable for those that have joined us today, and likewise for those that'll listen to the recording. I think we've encapsulated a good collection of discussions at this stage of the game, and really can be called a bit of a milestone, and we'll continue to add as we move forward.
Yep. Thank you, Sai, and it was great interacting with you always, and then looking forward for our next one. Thank you.
Likewise, my dear friend. Thank you so much for making the time, and thank you for all those who have joined us. We'll definitely have other topics that we'll be diving into. Until next time, thank you again, and we look forward. Take good care.